Okay, here we are at the next long translation in stage 25 of Cambridge Latin, Modestus Custos, which means Modestus, the guard. So let's jump into this translation. Modestus et stritio carcerum ingressi, calas in quibus captivi, erat inspiciebant. So Modestus and Stritio are subject. We've got a participial phrase here with a perfect passive participle, though it is a deponent verb, so it's going to be translated actively. It means having entered the prison. And then we've got to go all the way to the end of the sentence to find our verb. We're inspecting. That's it. Imperfect indicative. The calas, the cells, and then we've got a relative clause that is describing those cells. So everything between in quibus and erant, the cells in which, so this is an ablative, locatival ablative, in which the captives were, or in which there were captives. Okay, the whole sentence is, Modestus and Stritio were inspecting, Modestus and Stritio, having entered the prison, were inspecting the cells in which there were prisoners. Okay. Habebat stritio tabulam in qua nomina captivorum scripta errant. So the word order is a little bit different. This is starting with a verb, which does happen in Latin, and stritio is the subject of it. So stritio was having, or just he had, a tabula, a tablet. So they wrote on wax tablets at that time. And they did that because you could remelt the wax and you could reuse it. So Stritio had a tablet, and then we've got another relative clause, everything from in qua all the way to the errant. You see, he had a tablet in which or upon which the nomina, the names of the captives, and scripta errant. We can look at this quite literally as were, and then scripta is having been written. So we could just say, upon which the names of the captives were written. But technically speaking, they've been a little bit clever. They're sticking in here a new tense. And this is it's called a pluperfect passive. And it is translated as on which the names of the captives had been written. That's the best way to translate a pluperfect passive. So Stritio had a tablet upon which the names of the captives or the prisoners had been written. Just like in English verbs, when we say he had been written or he was doing something, there's an auxiliary verb. So there are two verbs together making a form that is a tense. And we'll see that again in the next sentence. So Modestus eum rogavit in qua cella worcobrix inclusus esset. So the main clause here is Modestus asked him, and then Rogor is going to introduce a indirect question. So Modestus asked him, in qua, so that subordinates and introduces the indirect question, in what cell worcobrix inclusus esset, another compound form, also pluperfect subjunctive, but the difference is that esset is subjunctive, imperfect subjunctive, as opposed to errant is just ordinary imperfect indicative. So just like any other indirect statement or indirect question, you're just going to translate like an ordinary indicative verb, even though it's subjunctive. So that's going to be, Modestus asked him in what cell Vercobrix had been locked up, enclosed quite literally. Stritio tabulum inspiciens cognovit ubi Vercobrix iaceret, et modestum ad cellam duxit. So Stritio, and then we've got a present active participial phrase here, having inspecting, present active, inspecting the tablet, cognovit, knew, ubi, where, and that's introducing an indirect question, where Vercobrix iaceret, where Vercobrix was lying, where he was staying, if you will. And that's an imperfect subjunctive right there. And he led Modestus to the cell. So Stritio, inspecting the tablet, knew where Vercobrix was lying and led Modestus to the cell. Modestus cum ad portam callae ad veniset incertus constitit. So Modestus, and then everything between these two commas is a cum clause. It's a temporal clause that is subordinated by cum and has a pluperfect subjunctive verb. When he had arrived at the door of the cell, genitive, he stood there uncertainly. So he's incertus is nominative, it's modifying Modestus, but we translate it as an adverb. So he stood there uncertainly. And Strithio cur calam intrare times inquit. So Strithio asked, and then direct question right here, we can tell because these quotation marks, why are you afraid to enter the cell? Complementary infinitive right there. Vinctus est filius principis decianglorum te laedere non potest. So and we'll have to do this in a little bit of a different word order. The son of the chief of the Decianglii is bound. So this is what's called a perfect passive indicative. So we'd say the son of the chieftain of the Decianglii has been bound. Non-potest, he is not able, laedere, to harm te, you. He's not able to harm you. Cum stritio haec dixisit, Modestus iratus exclamavit caudax principis filium non temeo. So everything between cum and dixisit is a cum clause. It's temporal, and we can tell that there's a subjunctive there, pluperfect, of course. When Strithio had said these words, or this, Modestus exclaimed angrily, blockhead, non temeo, I do not fear the son, filium, of the chieftain. I do not fear the son of the chieftain. Constiti quod te expectabam. So I was waiting, or I was just standing there, quod, because I was waiting for you. So this is a causal clause. So I stood there because I was waiting for you. Volo te mii portam aperere. So I want you to open the door for me. I want you to open the door for me. Cum portam Strithio aperuisset. So when Strithio had opened the door, this is again a temporal clause. We can tell because cum plus subjunctive. Modestus rursus hesitavit. So Modestus again hesitated. Rursus is an adverb. Obscura est cella. So the room, the cell is dark. Inquit Modestus anxious, said Modestus anxiously, fermii lucernam, bring to me a lamp. So bring me a lamp. Stritio vir sumai patentiae, a lucernam tulit amico que tradidit. So bring me the lantern. Strithio, a man of the utmost patience, of the highest patience, brought. Tulit is from the verb pharaoh, so he is the perfect, it's an irregular perfect tense form of pharaoh. So he brought the lamp and tradidit, handed it to the friend. Okay, remember that everything that goes in front of the quay is actually going after the quay, or at least is translated after the quay. So he brought the lamp and handed it to the friend. Ille, he, calam ingressus, having entered the cell, discessit a conspectu, withdrew from sight. That's literally what it says. So he, having entered the cell, withdrew from sight. In angulo cellae jacebat worco brix. So in the corner of the cell, worker bricks was lying. Modestus cum eum vidicet gladium distinxit. So Modestus, when he had seen him, so we've got another cum clause with a pluperfect subjunctive, drew his sword. So Modestus, when he had seen him, drew a sword. Tum, then, ad medium calam progressus, participial phrase with a perfect passive participle that's deponent, so therefore it's taking a direct object. So having progressed to the middle of the cell, actually it's not a direct object, it's a participial, prepositional phrase, but it could take a direct object in theory, because it's a deponent verb. Coipit vircobrem vituperare. So he began to curse worker bricks. So then having progressed to the middle of the cell, began to curse worker-bricks. Worker-bricks tamen contumelias modesti audire non poterat, quod graviter dormiebat. So worker-bricks, however, poterat was not able, audire, to hear the bad words, the cursing, contumelias, of Modestus. So worker-bricks, however, was not able to hear Modestus's cursing, quod, because dormiebat graviter, he was sleeping heavily. Subito araniae, so suddenly, what are they called? The creepy crawly things, arachnophobia, spiders. Suddenly, spiders, lapsa etecto calai, having fallen from the ceiling of the cell, so having fallen from the cell ceiling, incidit in nasum modesti, landed, fell upon the nose of Modestus, so fell on Modestus's nose, landed on Modestus's nose, et trans os cucurit, and ran across his face. So suddenly spiders, having fallen from the roof of the cell, landed onto Modestus's nose and ran across his face. Modestus ab araniae territus e cella fugit, hementer clamans. So Modestus, having been terrified by the spiders, so that's perfect passive participle, fled from the cell, perfect tense, with a separation ablative, vehementer clamans, shouting vehemently, or exactly angrily, but something close to it. That's a present active participle, by the way. So we've got two participial phrases in that sentence. Strithio, qui extra calam stabat, attonitus erat. So Strithio, who was standing outside the cell, was astonished. So that's a relative clause right there describing Strithio. Nescebat enem cur Modestus clamarat. So he did not know, indeed, why Modestus was shouting. So that's introducing an indirect question. Strithio, Strithio clamavit. Strithio, Strithio, he exclaimed. That's a direct question or direct statement. Modestus, Modestus is the subject of clamavit. I sort of cut it off there unnecessarily. Claude portam celai. So close the door of the cell. That's still a direct command that he's giving. And claude is an imperative. Nobis necesse est summa cum diligentia, vercobrem custodiere. So this is our old friend of the adjective, neuter adjective plus dative plus est plus infinitive. So it is necessary for us to guard worker bricks, and then this is an ablative of manner. So with the utmost diligence. Notice that the adjective that's describing diligentia is in front of the preposition, and that's a very standard way of writing in original Latin. Etiam araniae eum adiuvant. Even the spiders are helping him. Strithio cum portam clausiset a modestum territum rogabit quid aci disset. So Strithio, when he had closed the door, that's a temporal cum clause with a subjunctive pluperfect, asked Modestus, the terrified Modestus, what had happened. So rogavit is taking the terrified Modestus as its direct object, and then it's introducing also an indirect question with quid. So he's asking what had happened. Pluperfect subjunctive there as well. So Strithio, when he'd closed the door, asked the terrified Modestus what had happened. Modeste inquit quam pallidus est. So Modestus, he said, how pale you are. Num captivum times. Remember, num expects a no answer. Surely you aren't afraid of the prisoner. Minimo pallidus sum quod non canavi respondit. So not at all. I am pale, quod, because I had not eaten, he responded. So quod right there is introducing an adverbial clause that's causal. Visne me ad colinam ire et tibi canam fere regavits to strithio. So, do you want, ne is introducing that it's a question, do you want me to go ad colinam, to the kitchen, and to bring food to you? So do you want me to go to the kitchen and bring food to you? Asked Strithio. Optimum consilium est. That is a great plan, or just it is a great plan. I added that for clarity in English. Inquit alter, said the other guy. Tu tamen hic mane. You, however, remain here. Hic is an adverb that just means here in this case, and mane is it's an imperative. Melius est mihi ipsi ad culinam ire quod quoquus decem denarios mihi debit. All right, our old friend of adjective plus est plus dative plus infinitive. It is better for me, myself. That's an intensive pronoun. It is better for me, myself, to go to the kitchen. So it is better for me to go to the kitchen myself. Quod, that is the causal clause, because the cook owes, debit, like debit cards and debt from this, owes 10 denarii to me. So it is better for me, myself, to go to the kitchen because the cook owes me 10 denarii. Haec locutus ad colinam statim cucurit. Having said this, he hurried immediately to the kitchen. A locutus is a perfect passive participle, and that whole haec locutus participial phrase is more or less acting as the subject of cucurit because there's no other nominative in the sentence. Alrighty, that is that translation. We only have one 3-part long translation to go. I'll see you there.